All right, so today we're going to talk about how to change numbers back and forth from fraction, decimals, and percents. So we kind of need to go through a few of those first. Okay, so first, if we're going to change from a fraction, let me get this up, fraction to a decimal, what we're going to do is we're going to actually divide. Now, there are a few that you should know from memory. These are ones that you should know. A half is 0.5. The next ones we're going to do is the 1/3 and 2/3. Now, 1/3 is a repeating, so it's going to be 0.3 repeating. And 2/3 means it's two of those, so that's 0.6 repeating. Then we get into our fours. So we have 1/4, 2/4. Now, if we reduce that, that's the same as 1/2, and 3/4. Now, a good way to remember this is if you're thinking of money, if you look at 1/4, which is 1/4, 1/4 is valued at 0.25. Two of those quarters are 50 cents, and 3/4 is 75. Okay. Then we get into the fifth. Okay, so we have 2/5, 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, and 4/5. Now, this is like taking $1 and splitting into 5 equal parts. So 1/5 would be 0.2 or 0.20. 2/5 would be 0.4. 3/5 is 0.6. And 8/5 is 0.8. The other one I think you should memorize from memory is your ninths. Now, anytime that top number is divided by 9, it's going to be that number repeating. So it's going to be 0.1 repeating. 2/9 is 0.2 repeating. 3/9 is 0.3 repeating. 4/9 is 0.4 repeating, and so forth, okay? So that will continue all the way on down, okay? Now, let's talk about how to change a fraction that's not one of those to a decimal. So let's say we have 12 over 19. Okay? Well, in this case, that's not one that we can reduce down or find out from one of the short ones that we know. So what you may have to do is you may have to actually divide. So we're going to go straight over here to the side of our paper. We're not going to divide right there beside of it. It's going to clutter up the middle of my paper. So we're going to go to the right-hand side. We're going to take the bottom number and divide it into the top number. Now, this is probably a review. Most of you should know how to do this. Okay, well, 19 cannot go into 12, so we know that's 0. We add a decimal and add a 0. Now I need to know how many times 19 will go into 112. So now we need 19 into 120. Okay, that's going to, now I need to move that decimal up. Now that's going to be 6. So 6 times 9 is 54. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 5 is 11. We're going to subtract. We get 6. I'm going to add another 0. When I do 19 into 60, that's going to be 3. So 3 times 19 is 57. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to get 3. I would go ahead and add another 0. I'm running out of room, though. And then 19 will go into 30 one time. So my decimal from 12 over 19 would be 0.631. Now it does keep going, but I'm going to stop at that point to give me an estimate of what that decimal would be. Okay, so let's look at some other ones. Let's say we have 2 over 7. That wasn't 1, so we're going to go over to the side, take 7 into 2. 7 cannot go into 2. We're going to add a decimal. We're going to add a 0. So 7 into 20 would be 2 times. That would be 14. We're going to subtract, get 6, add another 0. 7 into 60, that was going to be 8. That's 56. Subtract, we get 4. Add another 0. 7 into 40 is going to be 5. So that's 35. Subtract, Okay, and again, we can keep going, but we know that 2 over 7 is 0.285. Okay? All right, so that's a quick way to do fractions to decimals. Now, if you have access to a calculator, when you do this and you put it in, it's going to be 2. 2 is going to go in first. Then you're going to hit your divide key, and then your 7, and then that would give you your answer as well. Okay, so that's using a calculator. Now, if we want to go from a decimal to a percent, okay, so if we have a decimal, let's say we have 0.2, to go from a decimal to a percent, you're going to move the decimal 2 places. Oops, I forgot to write decimal there. Let me go back. So you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, so here we go. 1, 2. That means I have to add a 0. And because I moved it 2 places to the right, I've got to pick up the percent sign. Okay, so 0.2 is the same as 20%. What if we have 0.37? Well, if I move it over 2 places, that becomes 37%. It always only moves 2 places. So what if we have 0.125? Again, I only move 2 places, so my new percent becomes 12.5%. Okay, what if there was a whole number out in front? Let's say we had 2.14. When I move that 2 places over, I get 214%. Okay, again, it still moves 2 places, so therefore it becomes 214%. Okay, now let's go the other way. Let's say we want to go from a percent to a fraction. I'm sorry, a percent to a decimal. I'll add the fraction in here in a minute. Okay, so if I have a percent of 34%, I'm going to drop the percent and move 2 places left. Okay, so I want to drop the percent, take the decimal where it's at, and move it 2 places to the left. So that becomes 0.34. Okay, what if you have 575%? Okay, again, you're going to drop the percent, take the decimal from its location, and move it 2 places. So we would get 5.75. Okay, what if you have 2%? Okay, when you drop it, you're going to move it 2 places. Now here is only 1, so for me to move the second, I've got to add a 0 in there. Okay, that's the biggest mistake on that. Most of the time people only want to go 1, but remember, you've got to move it 2 places to the left. Okay, now let's look at how to go from a decimal to a fraction. Okay, now this is what you can do from a decimal to a fraction. If we have 0.12, we're going to put it over the place value. So let's talk about our place values for a minute. Some of us missed those the last time. Okay, the first place here is called the 10th position. So that means it's going to be over 10. The second one is your 100th, which means it's over 100. The third place is your 1,000. So that means it's over 1,000. Okay, then you have the 10,000. Okay, and then you just keep going place value wise out. Okay, So in this case, we're going to kind of scroll up and look at it again. 0.12. That's your 100th position. So we know that 12 is over 100. Now, every fraction needs to be reduced until it's in the smallest form that it can. When you reduce, remember that number goes into both the top and the bottom number at the same time. So a lot of people, if you don't know your multiplication tables, this is where it hurts because you have to go by smaller numbers to get to the same outcome. Now, what I notice here is that 4 can go into both. So 12 divided by 4 is 3, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. So my fraction of that decimal is 3 over 25. Now, if you didn't know that, you might have had to divide by 2 twice, so you would have gotten the same result. Okay, let's say we have 0.675. Well, at this point, because that's the thousandth place, I'm going to put 675 over 1,000, and then I'm going to reduce. Well, here I want to reduce by 25. Okay, so I'm thinking how many quarters would go into $6.75. So that's going to be 20. It's going to be 27, and then $10 out of 20, 25 will go into $10 40 times. Okay, so there would be my reduced fraction of what I needed. Now, if you didn't know that, you might have to divide by 5 a time or two to get down to the same outcome. Okay, what if there was a whole number out front? Let's say it was 1.34. Okay, well, the 1's a whole number, so when I make my fraction, I'm just going to put that as a whole number out front, and then I would put my 34 over 100 and then reduce. So I would get 17 over 50 because I'm going to reduce by 2. Okay, now the one thing sometimes they'll say go from a fraction to a percent, or go from a percent to a fraction. Now, if you go from a fraction to a percent, okay, a fraction to a percent, you can go to a decimal, from a fraction to a decimal, and then a decimal to a percent. That's fine. Some of them, though, as a fraction, let's say you have 1/2. Okay, if I want to go to a percent, if I can force this to become 100 on the bottom, my top number is the percent. So if I multiply this by 50, 2 times 50 is 100. So now 1 times 50 is 50. So I know my percent here is going to be 50%, because your percent is always out of 100. Okay, that's the whole percent is 100%. Now, 1/3 cannot convert to 100, not evenly. Okay, you can force and play with it a little bit, but because it's a decimal there and it's a repeating decimal, it's quite hard to get up to that 100 unless you carry by a lot of decimal places. But if it's something like 10th, okay, then yeah, you can multiply that by 10 over 10, and that forces it to 100. So therefore, you know that is 10%. Okay, and same way from a percent to a fraction, you can do that as well. If you have a percent, you know the percent can automatically be written over 100 and then reduced, and that would give you a fraction. Okay, all right, so for tonight's homework, you're going to be going back and forth from fractions, decimals, and percents. Now, if they ask you to compare any, make them the same unit before you compare numbers. Okay?